Stop. In the next 5 seconds, I am going to give you something valuable, something school never tells you. History does not destroy great men. Great men destroy themselves. Napoleon Bonaparte did not rise because Europe was weak. He rose because Europe was exhausted. And he did not fall because he lacked intelligence. He fell because intelligence was no longer enough to satisfy ambition. Before he became emperor, before his name terrified kings and generals, Napoleon was an outsider. He was born far from the centers of power, on an island that belonged to France but did not feel French. Corsica was rugged, isolated, and suspicious of authority. Its people valued strength, discipline, and pride, not elegance or tradition. Napoleon grew up surrounded by tension. He spoke with an accent that marked him as different. He carried an identity that did not fully belong. From the beginning, he was separate. And separation creates hunger. At military school, Napoleon did not blend in. He did not charm. He did not socialize. He studied, relentlessly, strategy, mathematics, artillery, logistics. While others trained for honor, Napoleon trained for efficiency. He learned that war was not about bravery. It was about control. When the French Revolution exploded, it shattered more than a monarchy. It shattered the rules of power. Old hierarchies collapsed. Titles became meaningless. Experience was suddenly less valuable than results. Chaos created opportunity. Napoleon saw it instantly. As France descended into instability, riots, and fear, the government needed order more than ideals. When Paris burned with unrest, Napoleon did not hesitate. He used force decisively, efficiently, without hesitation. And the chaos stopped. Not because people loved him, but because fear respects competence. This moment marked Napoleon's true emergence. From that point forward, every conflict became an audition. His first major command in Italy was considered a political disposal, a small army. Poor supply, low expectations. Napoleon turned it into a masterpiece. He moved faster than anyone thought possible. He separated enemies before they could unite. He attacked where they were weakest, not where they were strongest. He understood something others did not. Wars are won before the first shot is fired. Morale, speed, surprise. His victories in Italy shocked Europe. Not because France won, but because Napoleon made it look effortless. A young general with an underfed army dismantled coalitions that had spent decades fighting traditional wars. Napoleon became dangerous. Success followed success. Each victory reinforced a belief that would later consume him, that logic could defeat anything. He returned to France not as a servant of the state, but as its solution. Politicians feared him, the people admired him, the army trusted him. Power began to shift quietly. Napoleon did not seize control through revolution. He absorbed it through necessity. Eventually, France did what exhausted nations always do. It handed control to the man who promised stability. Napoleon crowned himself emperor, not because he loved ceremony, but because he understood symbolism. Power must look inevitable. As emperor, Napoleon did not rest. He restructured Europe like a battlefield. Kingdoms were rearranged, laws rewritten, armies modernized. He was no longer fighting wars. He was designing a continent. And for a time, it worked. Coalitions rose against him, and collapsed. Generals opposed him, and failed. Battles became demonstrations of superiority. Napoleon believed in speed, flexibility, and relentless pressure. His armies marched faster, struck harder, and reorganized quicker than any force before them. But beneath the brilliance, something subtle was changing. Napoleon stopped listening. Early in his career, he adapted constantly. Now, he expected reality to adapt to him. Each victory increased his confidence. Each success narrowed his tolerance for doubt. He began to believe that defeat was not just unlikely, but impossible. Europe, however, was learning. Nations adapted, armies studied his methods, coalitions formed not out of loyalty, but survival. The wars became larger, longer, more expensive. Napoleon responded with escalation. More troops, more fronts, more ambition. The system that had once rewarded efficiency now demanded resources it could not sustain. Then came the decision that would define his fall. Russia. Napoleon believed numbers and discipline could defeat distance and climate. He believed strategy could overcome geography. He was wrong. As his grand army marched east, The land retreated before him. Cities burned themselves rather than surrender. Supplies vanished. Roads stretched endlessly. There was nothing left to conquer. Winter arrived without drama, only certainty. Cold did what armies could not. It slowed movement. It broke supply lines. It stripped discipline down to survival. Napoleon watched the greatest army Europe had ever seen dissolve, not through battle, but through endurance. Retreat became inevitable. And retreat destroyed the illusion. Once the myth of invincibility was gone, Europe reacted instantly. Coalitions returned stronger. Battles were fought without fear. Napoleon still won some, but never completely. Finally, he lost everything. He was forced into exile, removed from the world he had tried to control. For a brief moment, he returned, one final attempt to reclaim destiny. And then, it ended. Napoleon was exiled again, this time, permanently, to an island where the ocean replaced armies. The conqueror of Europe reduced to a spectator. If you are still watching at this point, pause for a moment. If you enjoy cinematic history told without comfort or simplification, like this video, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment below. Because this story is not about battles. It is about ambition. And we are only halfway through. When Napoleon returned from the ruins of Russia, Europe no longer saw a god of war. They saw a man. The illusion that had protected him for years was gone. And once an illusion breaks, it never fully reforms. Nations that had once hesitated now acted with confidence. Generals who once feared his name now studied his mistakes. Coalitions no longer collapsed at the first sign of pressure. They endured. Napoleon still fought with brilliance. His mind had not dulled. His instincts remained sharp, but something essential had changed. He was no longer fighting from a position of overwhelming momentum. He was reacting. The wars that followed were different. Longer, more cautious, more desperate. Each victory cost more than the last. Each loss carried consequences he could no longer erase with speed alone. The system he had built demanded constant success. And the system did not forgive failure. As enemies closed in from every direction, Napoleon made decisions driven not by opportunity, but by urgency. He demanded more soldiers from a population already exhausted. He opened new fronts to compensate for weaknesses elsewhere. Ambition no longer expanded power. It consumed it. Eventually, the inevitable happened. Napoleon was defeated. Not in a single dramatic collapse, but through exhaustion, attrition, and isolation. His allies abandoned him. His generals hesitated. France, once inspired, now feared endless war more than foreign domination. He abdicated. For the first time in his life, Napoleon stopped commanding. He was exiled to a small island, surrounded by water instead of armies. Elba was quiet, controlled, contained. The world moved on without him. But Napoleon was not a man built for stillness. Power had defined his identity for so long that peace felt like erasure. And when an opportunity appeared, however unlikely, he took it. Napoleon escaped. His return to France was brief, surreal, and deeply revealing. Soldiers sent to arrest him joined him instead. Old loyalty resurfaced. The legend flickered back to life. For one final moment, Europe held its breath. This was Napoleon's last gamble, not for expansion, but for relevance. The battle that followed would decide everything. At Waterloo, Napoleon faced an enemy that no longer feared him. His opponents held their ground. They absorbed pressure, they waited. And when the moment came, they struck. Napoleon was defeated decisively. There would be no return this time. He was exiled again, farther, deeper, beyond escape, to a remote island in the Atlantic, where the horizon was empty and the future immovable. St. Helena became his final battlefield. There were no strategies left to test, no armies to maneuver, no continents to redesign. Only memory. In isolation, Napoleon reflected on his life, and rewrote it. He framed himself as a visionary betrayed by fate, a reformer misunderstood by monarchs, a genius undone by circumstance rather than choice. History would decide how much of that was true. Because Napoleon's legacy is not simple. He modernized warfare. He reshaped Europe's political map. He spread legal reforms that still influence societies today. But he also normalized total war. He exhausted nations. He placed personal ambition above sustainable peace. Napoleon proved something both inspiring and terrifying. That one individual, armed with intelligence and will, can reshape an entire continent. And that same individual can destroy himself by refusing to stop. He did not know how to accept limits. And limits, eventually, accept everyone. Napoleon Bonaparte died far from home, far from power, far from the world he once controlled. His death was quiet, unremarkable, human. But his impact was anything but. If you have stayed with this story until now, take a moment. If you value deep, cinematic history told honestly, without glorification or simplification, like this video. Subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment below. Tell us what you believe. Was Napoleon Bonaparte the greatest strategic genius Europe ever produced? Or was he the most expensive lesson in what happens when ambition refuses to recognize its limits? Because history does not judge ambition by intent. It judges it by consequence. Napoleon shook Europe to its core. And Europe survived him. That may be his greatest defeat.